Marcus Richardson stood in his penthouse office, watching the city sprawl beneath him like a living map of his success. At 34, he owned 12 restaurants, 3 hotels, and a tech company that had just gone public. His bank account held more zeros than most people could count, but his heart felt emptier than the streets below at midnight. The problem started in college when Sarah Mitchell broke up with him. She had been everything to him, the girl who made him laugh until his stomach hurt and dream of a future filled with simple happiness. But when his family's restaurant chain began taking off, when the money started flowing like water after a dam burst, everything changed. Sarah's friends whispered in her ear about prenups and gold diggers, about how she could never be sure if he loved her or just wanted arm candy for business events. "I can't tell if you want me or if you want someone to spend your money on," she had said that rainy Tuesday in their cramped dorm room. The words hit him like a physical blow, and he watched helplessly as she packed her things. "Every time we go out now, you pay for everything. I feel like I'm being bought, not loved." That breakup taught Marcus a lesson that would shape the next decade of his life. Money changed everything. It changed how people looked at him, how they talked to him, and most importantly, how they felt about him. Women who had never given him a second glance suddenly found him fascinating. They laughed too hard at his jokes, agreed too quickly with his opinions, and their eyes lit up when they saw his cars, his watches, his lifestyle. He tried dating in his usual circles, the world of business dinners and charity galas, where everyone knew his net worth before they knew his middle name. There was Jennifer, the daughter of a hotel magnate, who spent their first date calculating how their combined assets would make them a powerhouse couple. There was Amanda, a successful lawyer who saw their relationship as a merger of equals, complete with strategic advantages and mutual benefits. And there was Victoria, whose idea of pillow talk involved discussing his investment portfolio. Each relationship felt like a business transaction. The women were beautiful, successful, and intelligent, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were dating his bank account, with him attached as a necessary accessory. They loved the restaurants he could book with a phone call, the vacations to private islands, the jewelry that appeared like magic whenever they mentioned admiring something in a store window. But did they love him? The question haunted him through sleepless nights in his king-sized bed, surrounded by luxury but feeling utterly alone. He would lie there, staring at the ceiling, wondering if anyone would choose to be with Marcus, the person, rather than Marcus, the millionaire. The doubt crept into every interaction, poisoning even genuine moments of connection. When a woman smiled at him, was it real or rehearsed? When she said she loved him, was she talking to him or to his credit limit? His breaking point came during a dinner with Rebecca, a stunning interior designer he had been seeing for 3 months. She was perfect on paper, everything he thought he wanted in a partner. But as she casually mentioned wanting to redecorate his penthouse with a budget that could buy a small house, Marcus felt something inside him snap. He excused himself to the bathroom and stared at his reflection in the mirror, seeing a man who had everything but felt like he had nothing. That night, Marcus made a decision that would change his life forever. He would disappear from his world of wealth and privilege. He would become someone ordinary, someone average, someone who could discover if genuine love still existed in the world. He would find a woman who could love him for who he was, not what he owned. The plan formed slowly over the following weeks. Marcus would create a new identity, a new life stripped of all the trappings that had defined him for so long. He would move to a different city, get a regular job, live in a normal apartment, and see if he could find what had been missing from his life. It felt like the most important experiment he had ever undertaken, with his heart and his future happiness as the stakes. He chose Portland, a city where he had no business connections and no reputation preceding him. He rented a modest apartment in a working-class neighborhood, the kind of place where people knew their neighbors and complained about rent increases. He got a job as an assistant manager at a local bookstore, a position that paid him in a week. what he used to spend on a single dinner. His expensive suits were replaced with jeans and flannel shirts. His luxury car was traded for a used Honda Civic that made concerning noises when he turned left. The transformation was more difficult than he had imagined. Simple things like grocery shopping became adventures in budgeting. He learned to clip coupons, to compare prices, to choose generic brands over name brands. His hands, once soft from a life of leisure, developed calluses from stacking books and moving boxes. His back ached from standing all day, something he had never experienced in his climate-controlled offices. But something wonderful was happening, too. For the first time in years, people talked to him without that calculating look in their eyes. His co-workers invited him for beers after work, not because they wanted something from him, but because they enjoyed his company. Customers chatted with him about books and life, seeing him as just another person trying to make his way in the world. Marcus began to remember who he had been before the money, before the success, before the weight of wealth had changed how the world saw him. He was funny in a self-deprecating way, curious about people's stories, and genuinely interested in the small details that made up ordinary lives. He found joy in simple pleasures he had forgotten existed, the satisfaction of a job well done, the comfort of a home-cooked meal, the pleasure of a good book on a rainy evening. As weeks turned into months, Marcus settled into his new life with surprising ease. He was becoming the person he wanted to be, authentic and unguarded. Now all he needed was to find someone who could love that person, someone who would choose him not for what he could provide, but for who he was at his core. He had no idea that the woman he would fall for would teach him lessons about love, deception, and the human heart that would shake him to his very foundation. Emma Chen walked into the bookstore on a Tuesday morning that changed everything. Though neither she nor Marcus knew it at the time, she was looking for a cookbook for her grandmother's birthday, something with traditional recipes that would remind the old woman of her youth in Taiwan. Marcus was restocking the cooking section when she approached, her dark hair catching the morning light streaming through the store's front windows. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice carrying a slight accent that made Marcus look up from the books he was arranging. "I'm looking for something specific. My grandmother loves to cook, but her eyesight isn't what it used to be. Do you have any cookbooks with large print?" Marcus found himself studying her face as she spoke. Emma had the kind of natural beauty that didn't need enhancement, the kind that came from someone comfortable in their own skin. Her clothes were simple but well cared for, and when she smiled, it reached her eyes in a way that seemed completely genuine. She was probably in her late 20s with laugh lines that suggested she used her smile often. "I think I can help you with that," Marcus said, leading her to a section he had reorganized just the week before. "We have several large print cookbooks. Here, are you looking for any particular type of cuisine?" Traditional Chinese would be perfect, but honestly, she'll be happy with anything she can actually read, Emma laughed. "She's been trying to teach me her recipes for years, but I'm terrible at cooking. I keep hoping if I get her the right cookbook, some of her magic might rub off on me." They spent the next 20 minutes going through different options, and Marcus found himself drawn into conversation with her in a way that felt natural and unforced. Emma told him about her grandmother, who had immigrated to America with nothing but a suitcase and a handful of family recipes. She spoke about her job as a nurse at the local hospital, how she worked long shifts but loved helping people heal. She mentioned her small apartment that she shared with her cat, Mr. Whiskers, who had opinions about everything and wasn't shy about expressing them. What struck Marcus most was how Emma talked about money, or rather how she didn't. She mentioned choosing between different books based on price, but not in a way that seemed embarrassed or ashamed. It was simply practical, the way someone talks about checking the weather before choosing an outfit. When she finally selected a moderately priced cookbook with large print and beautiful photos, she counted out cash from a small wallet that had clearly seen better days. "Thank you so much for your help," she said, as Marcus rang up her purchase. "You really know your books. How long have you been working here?" "About 4 months now," Marcus replied, surprised by how much he wanted to keep the conversation going. "I'm still learning, but I love it. There's something special about helping people find exactly what they need." Emma smiled that genuine smile again. "That's wonderful. It's so rare to find someone who actually enjoys their job. I'll have to come back and let you know how the cookbook works out." After she left, Marcus found himself thinking about her throughout the day. There had been something different about their interaction, something refreshing and real. Emma had looked at him and seen Mark, the bookstore employee, not Marcus the millionaire. She had been interested in his thoughts about books, not his thoughts about investments. She had treated him like a person worth talking to, not a bank account worth pursuing. True to her word, Emma returned 2 weeks later, this time looking for a mystery novel for herself. She told Marcus that the cookbook had been a huge hit with her grandmother, who had already made 3 different recipes and declared the print size perfect for her aging eyes. They talked about books, about her work at the hospital, about his experiences working in retail. Marcus learned that Emma volunteered at a local animal shelter on weekends, that she sent money to her parents every month to help with their mortgage, and that she had never traveled outside the Pacific Northwest because she was saving every spare dollar for her grandmother's medical treatments. Their friendship developed slowly and naturally over the following months. Emma would stop by the bookstore during her lunch breaks, and they would chat about whatever book she was currently reading. Marcus began recommending titles specifically for her, learning her preferences and surprising her with stories he thought she would love. She started bringing him coffee from the shop next door, having noticed that he always looked tired in the afternoons. Marcus found himself looking forward to Emma's visits more than anything else in his week. She had a way of making even ordinary moments feel special. When she laughed at his jokes, it wasn't the practiced laughter of someone trying to impress him. It was genuine amusement. When she disagreed with his opinion about a book, she did so thoughtfully and without concern for offending him. She treated him as an equal, someone whose thoughts and feelings mattered simply because he was human. The turning point came on a rainy Thursday evening when Marcus was closing the store alone. Emma appeared at the door just as he was about to lock up, soaked from the sudden downpour that had caught her without an umbrella. "I'm sorry," she said, water dripping from her hair onto the floor. "I know you're closing, but I was hoping to grab that book we talked about yesterday." Marcus let her in without hesitation, and as she browsed the shelves, he found himself really looking at her for the first time. Emma was beautiful, but it was more than that. She was kind and genuine and interested in the world around her. She worked hard for everything she had and never complained about what she didn't have. She was exactly the kind of person he had been hoping to find, someone who could love him for who he was rather than what he owned. "Would you like to get dinner sometime?" The words came out of his mouth before he could second-guess himself. "I mean, as friends or maybe more than friends if you're interested." Emma looked up from the book she was holding, surprise flickering across her face. "I'd like that," she said simply. "I'd like that a lot." Their first date was at a small Italian restaurant that Marcus had chosen specifically because it was the kind of place where a bookstore employee would reasonably take someone for dinner. They split a pizza and talked for hours about everything and nothing. Emma told him about her childhood, about helping her grandmother in the kitchen and learning that food was love made visible. Marcus told her about his own childhood, carefully, editing out the parts about private schools and trust funds, instead focusing on the universal experiences of growing up and figuring out who you wanted to become. As they walked back to Emma's apartment building, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Pure happiness unmarked by doubt or suspicion. Emma liked him. Not his money, not his connections, not what he could do for her, but him. The man who restocked books and recommended mysteries and listened to her stories about difficult patients and rescued cats. When Emma kissed him goodnight on her doorstep, soft and sweet and full of promise, Marcus thought he had finally found what he had been searching for. He had found a woman who could love him for exactly who he was. He had no way of knowing that Emma Chen was hiding secrets of her own, secrets that would challenge everything he thought he knew about love, honesty, and the games people play with each other's hearts. The relationship between Marcus and Emma blossomed like a flower opening to sunlight. Over the next 6 months, they fell into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. Emma would stop by the bookstore after her shifts at the hospital, often, bringing Marcus homemade sandwiches or leftover soup from her grandmother's kitchen. They would spend quiet evenings in Emma's small apartment, reading together on her second-hand couch while Mr. Whiskers judged them from his perch on the windowsill. Marcus had never been happier. For the first time in his adult life, he was in a relationship where money wasn't the underlying current of every conversation. Emma never asked about his financial goals or his investment strategies. She didn't hint about expensive restaurants or designer clothes. Instead, she seemed genuinely content with their simple dates, walks in the park, movie nights at home, and occasional dinners at neighborhood spots where they could afford to split the bill. What amazed Marcus most was how thoughtful Emma was with the little money she had. She would save for weeks to buy him a book she thought he would love, carefully wrapping it in newspaper comics because she couldn't afford proper gift wrap. She made him a scarf for his birthday, working on it in secret during her breaks at the hospital. When his ancient coffee maker finally gave up, she surprised him with a replacement she had found at a thrift store, proudly presenting it as if it were made of gold. These gestures meant more to Marcus than any expensive gift he had ever received. Emma was giving him pieces of herself, her time and attention and care, without expecting anything material in return. She seemed to genuinely enjoy his company, laughing at his stories about difficult customers and listening intently when he talked about the books he was reading. She never made him feel like he needed to be more entertaining or more successful to keep her interest. Their physical relationship developed slowly and sweetly. Emma wasn't trying to impress him with sophisticated tastes or worldly experience. She was simply herself, genuine and warm, and present in every moment they shared. When she fell asleep against his shoulder during movie nights, when she hummed while cooking breakfast in his tiny kitchen, when she absently reached for his hand while they walked, Marcus felt like he was seeing what real love looked like for the first time. But even in the midst of his happiness, Marcus sometimes felt the weight of his deception. Emma would mention worrying about her student loans or saving money for her grandmother's medications, and Marcus would have to bite his tongue to keep from offering to help. He wanted to tell her that money didn't have to be a source of stress, that he could solve all her financial worries with a single phone call. But he also knew that the moment he revealed his true identity, everything would change. The first crack in his perfect world appeared on a Wednesday evening when Emma was helping him reorganize his apartment. She was going through his bookshelf, making suggestions about better arrangements when she paused at a particular volume. "This is interesting," she said, holding up a leather-bound first edition that Marcus had forgotten he owned. "This looks really old and expensive. Where did you get it?" Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. The book was worth more than he made in 6 months at the bookstore, a rare edition he had purchased years ago without thinking twice about the price. "It was a gift," he said quickly, "from a relative who collects books." Emma nodded, but Marcus noticed her looking at the book more carefully before placing it back on the shelf. He made a mental note to be more careful about what he left visible in his carefully constructed ordinary life. Similar moments began accumulating like drops of water that would eventually overflow a cup. Emma noticed that his clothes, while simple, were of unusually high quality. She commented on how well-made his furniture was for someone on a bookstore salary. She was curious about why he never seemed stressed about money the way she and her friends were, how he could always afford to split dinner bills without carefully calculating the cost first. Marcus deflected these observations with vague explanations about being good with budgeting and having generous relatives, but he could see Emma's natural intelligence starting to pick up on inconsistencies in his story. She was too smart and too observant not to notice the small details that didn't quite add up. The situation became more complicated when Emma started talking about their future together. She would mention dreams of saving enough money to take a real vacation someday, maybe to visit her relatives in California. She talked about wanting to help her grandmother more, but being limited by her modest nurse's salary. She worried about what would happen when her aging car finally died and how she would afford a replacement. These conversations broke Marcus's heart. Emma was denying herself simple pleasures and living with constant financial stress while he had more money than he could spend in a lifetime. He wanted desperately to sweep away all her worries, to give her the security and comfort she deserved. But he also knew that the moment he revealed his wealth, he would lose the one thing that made their relationship special, her love for him as an ordinary man. The internal conflict was eating away at him. He had started this experiment to find genuine love, and he had found it in Emma. But maintaining the deception was becoming increasingly difficult and morally complicated. He was lying to the woman he loved about fundamental aspects of who he was. Was their relationship really genuine if it was built on such a massive deception? Marcus began to consider telling Emma the truth. He rehearsed conversations in his mind, imagining how he would explain everything. He would tell her about his wealth, about his reasons for hiding it, about how much their relationship meant to him. He hoped she would understand, that she would see his deception as a romantic gesture rather than a betrayal. But every time he worked up the courage to have that conversation, doubt crept in. What if Emma felt manipulated and lied to? What if she could never trust him again? What if she decided that their entire relationship had been fake? The risk of losing her seemed too great. So Marcus continued living his double life, growing more and more uncomfortable with the lies he had to tell to maintain it. Meanwhile, Emma seemed happier than ever. She talked about how lucky she felt to have found someone who understood her, who didn't judge her for her simple lifestyle or her financial limitations. She told her friends that Marcus was different from other men she had dated, that he seemed to value the same things she did, family and kindness and genuine connection over material success. These conversations, which Emma shared with Marcus, in the spirit of intimacy and trust, only made his guilt worse. She was praising him for qualities that weren't entirely real, falling in love with a version of himself that he had carefully constructed. The irony wasn't lost on him that in trying to find someone who would love him for who he really was, he had created a situation where he wasn't being who he really was at all. As their one-year anniversary approached, Marcus knew he was facing a crossroads. He could continue living this lie indefinitely, always careful and always guilty, or he could risk everything by telling Emma the truth. Either choice felt like it could destroy the best thing that had ever happened to him. He had no idea that Emma was facing her own moment of truth, wrestling with secrets that would soon explode both their carefully constructed worlds. The truth began to unravel on a Saturday morning when Marcus made a mistake that would change everything. He had planned to spend the day with Emma at the farmer's market, one of their favorite weekend activities. They would browse the stalls, sample local produce, and buy ingredients for the dinner they would cook together later. It was the kind of simple, perfect day that had become the foundation of their relationship. But Marcus's phone rang just as they were leaving Emma's apartment. The caller ID showed his lawyer's name, someone who only contacted him about urgent business matters. Marcus had been expecting this call for weeks, something about a major acquisition that required his immediate attention and signature. "I'm sorry I have to take this," Marcus told Emma, stepping into the hallway. "It's about my grandmother's estate, family stuff." The conversation lasted 15 minutes, and Marcus found himself slipping back into his old persona, discussing millions of dollars in transactions with the casual ease of someone for whom such sums were routine. He was so focused on the business details that he didn't notice Emma had followed him into the hallway, concerned about what sounded like a serious family emergency. Emma stood frozen outside her own apartment door, listening to the man she loved. discuss financial matters that made no sense with his story of being a struggling bookstore employee. She heard him mention portfolio adjustments, merger timelines, and legal structures with the fluency of someone deeply embedded in the world of high finance. The Marcus she knew could barely afford to split dinner bills. Yet here he was, talking about multi-million-dollar investments as if they were grocery lists. When Marcus ended the call and turned around, he found Emma staring at him with an expression he had never seen before. It wasn't anger or hurt, but something worse, a kind of cold recognition that made his stomach drop. "Who are you?" Emma asked quietly. "And don't tell me that was about your grandmother's estate. I'm not stupid, Marcus. Or is that even your real name?" Marcus felt the world tilting around him. This wasn't how he had planned to tell her. He had imagined a romantic dinner, a carefully prepared explanation, a chance to help her understand his motivations. Instead, he was standing in a dingy apartment hallway, caught in his lies like a teenager who had been sneaking out past curfew. "My name really is Marcus," he said slowly. "But you're right, that wasn't about my grandmother. Emma, there are things about me that I haven't told you. Important things." "How important?" Emma crossed her arms, and Marcus could see her building walls around herself, preparing for impact. "Are you married? Do you have kids? Are you some kind of criminal?" "Nothing like that," Marcus said quickly. "It's about money. I have money, Emma. A lot of money. More than I told you." Emma stared at him for a long moment, and Marcus watched her intelligent mind working through the implications. "How much more?" Marcus took a deep breath. "Enough that I don't actually need to work at the bookstore. Enough that I could afford to help you with your grandmother's medical bills without missing it. Enough that we could go to California tomorrow if you wanted to visit your relatives." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Emma was processing not just the revelation about his wealth, but all the moments over the past year when she had worried about money while he had said nothing. All the times she had chosen cheaper options to accommodate what she thought was his budget. All the times she had felt guilty about her financial stress while he had been sitting on a fortune. "So this whole thing," Emma said finally, her voice eerily calm, "you working at the bookstore, living in that tiny apartment, acting like you understand what it's like to struggle, it's all been fake?" "Not fake," Marcus said desperately. "My feelings for you are real. Everything between us is real. I just wanted to know if someone could love me for who I am, not for what I have." Emma laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Who you are? You've been lying to me for a year, Marcus. I don't know who you are. I thought I was dating someone who understood my life, someone who was in the same situation as me. Instead, I've been dating someone who was playing pretend, someone who could have solved every problem I've told you about, but chose to watch me struggle instead." The accusation hit Marcus like a physical blow because he couldn't deny it. He had watched Emma. Stress about money had seen her deny herself small pleasures to save for necessities, had listened to her worry about her grandmother's care, all while knowing he could fix everything with a single check. "I wanted to help," Marcus said. "So many times I wanted to tell you, to take care of everything. But I was afraid you would change, that you would see me differently." "Of course I would see you differently," Emma snapped, her calm finally cracking. "Because you are different. You're not the man I fell in love with. That man doesn't exist. He was just a character you were playing." Marcus reached for her, but Emma stepped back. "Please, let me explain everything. Let me tell you why I did. Let me show you that my feelings are genuine." "Your feelings might be genuine, but your life isn't," Emma said. "I need time to think about this. I need time to figure out what was real and what was performance." She went back into her apartment and closed the door, leaving Marcus standing in the hallway with his world crumbling around him. He had found the love he was looking for, but his deception had poisoned it. Emma wasn't rejecting his wealth. She was rejecting his dishonesty. Marcus returned to his own apartment and sat on his carefully chosen second-hand furniture, staring at the walls of his manufactured ordinary life. Everything felt fake now, contaminated by the lies he had told to maintain it. He had thought he was being romantic, creating a scenario where true love could flourish. Instead, he had been selfish, manipulating circumstances to get what he wanted, without considering how his deception might affect Emma. For 3 days, he heard nothing from her. He went to work at the bookstore, mechanically helping customers while his mind replayed every moment of their relationship. He wondered if Emma was questioning every conversation they had ever had, every gesture he had made, every emotion he had expressed. Was she wondering if any of it had been real? On the 4th day, Emma appeared at the bookstore just before closing time. She looked tired, as if she hadn't been sleeping well, but her expression was determined. "I've been thinking," she said without preamble, "about everything you told me and everything you didn't tell me. I have questions, and I need honest answers. Complete honesty, Marcus. No more lies, no more omissions, no more protecting me from your truth." Marcus nodded eagerly. "Anything. Ask me anything." Emma pulled out her phone and showed him a news article she had found. "Is this you?" The article was from a business magazine, featuring a photo of Marcus at a charity gala from 2 years earlier. He was wearing a tuxedo that cost more than most people's monthly rent, standing next to a woman in a designer gown, both of them smiling for the cameras. The headline read, "Tech mogul Marcus Richardson donates $2 million to Children's Hospital." Marcus looked at the photo of his former self, a man who seemed like a stranger now. "Yes," he said quietly. "That's me." Emma studied his face. "So you're not just wealthy, you're famous wealthy. You're the kind of wealthy that gets written about in magazines." "I was," Marcus corrected. "I stepped away from all of that when I came here. I wanted a different life." "And what about her?" Emma pointed to the woman in the photo. "Was she part of your old life too?" Marcus looked more closely at the image and felt his heart sink as he recognized the woman beside him. It was Victoria Chen, the investment banker he had dated briefly years ago. The same Victoria who had seen their relationship as a business merger, who had calculated their combined net worth on their 3rd date. But as Marcus stared at the photo, a terrible realization began to dawn on him. The woman's face, while more heavily made up and styled differently, had familiar features. The shape of her eyes, the curve of her smile, even the way she held her head, all reminded him of someone he knew very well. "Emma," Marcus said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "What's your last name?" Emma's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "You know my last name, Marcus. It's Chen." Marcus felt the world spinning around him as puzzle pieces began clicking into place. Emma Chen. Victoria Chen. The same unusual spelling of an uncommon surname. The same bone structure beneath different styling. The same intelligence in the eyes, though Emma's had always seemed warmer, more genuine. "Oh, God," Marcus breathed, understanding flooding through him like ice water. "You're her sister." Emma's calm mask finally slipped, and Marcus saw something in her expression that made his blood run cold. It wasn't surprise at being discovered. It was the look of someone whose carefully laid plan had finally reached its climax. Emma's silence stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Marcus watched her face transform as she dropped the mask she had been wearing for over a year. The warmth in her eyes cooled, and her posture shifted from defensive to calculating. She was no longer the struggling nurse he had fallen in love with. She was someone else entirely. "You're very smart, Marcus," she said finally, her voice carrying an edge he had never heard before. "It took you longer than I expected, but you figured it out." Marcus felt like he was drowning. Victoria is your sister. You knew who I was from the beginning. Victoria is my older sister, yes, and she told me all about you after you broke up with her. Emma walked around the bookstore, running her fingers along the spines of books with casual familiarity. She said you were the kind of man who thought money was a problem to be solved, who couldn't understand why she found your wealth intimidating rather than attractive. The memories came flooding back to Marcus now. Victoria Chen, brilliant and beautiful, who had analyzed their relationship like a business proposal. She had wanted to merge their lives the way companies merged assets, efficiently and strategically. When he had tried to explain that he wanted something more emotional, more spontaneous, she had looked at him like he was speaking a foreign language. Victoria said you were looking for something authentic, Emma continued, settling into the reading chair where she had spent so many afternoons chatting with him. She said you had some romantic notion about finding a woman who could love you without knowing about your money. She thought it was naive and stupid. Marcus sank into the chair across from her, the same chairs where they had discussed books and dreams and built what he thought was a genuine connection. So you decided to give me what I wanted? I decided to see if Victoria was right about you being a fool. Emma's smile was sharp now, nothing like the gentle expressions he had grown to love. She bet me that you would fall for any woman who pretended to be poor and struggling. She said you were so desperate to be loved for yourself that you wouldn't see through even an obvious performance. The cruelty of it hit Marcus like a sledgehammer. It was all fake. Everything, every conversation, every laugh, every moment we shared. Not everything, Emma said, her voice softening slightly. Some of it became real, which honestly surprised me. I expected to get bored with the act after a few weeks, but you're actually a decent man underneath all that wealth and self-pity. You're funny and kind, and you actually listen when people talk to you. That's rarer than you might think. Marcus stared at her, trying to reconcile this cold stranger with the woman who had brought him homemade soup when he was sick, who had worried about his feelings, who had seemed to genuinely care about his thoughts and dreams. The struggling nurse story, he asked. I am a nurse, Emma said. That part was true, but I'm not struggling financially. Victoria has been very generous with me over the years, and I've made some smart investments. I chose nursing because I wanted to do something meaningful with my life, not because I needed the money. Your grandmother's medical bills? My grandmother is perfectly healthy and lives in a very comfortable retirement community that Victoria and I pay for together. She does have those recipes, though. That part was real. Marcus thought about all the times Emma had counted out cash, all the conversations about saving money, all the worry about expenses, the apartment, the old car, the way you acted like every dollar mattered. Props, Emma said simply. I rented that apartment specifically for this. My real home is about 20 minutes from here, in the hills overlooking the city. The car belongs to one of my co-workers who was happy to let me borrow it for a good cause. As for acting like money mattered, well, I'm a better actress than I thought I was. The betrayal was so complete, so thorough, that Marcus couldn't process it all at once. Every memory they had shared was now contaminated with the knowledge that Emma had been performing, calculating her responses to get the reaction she wanted from him. Why? Marcus asked, his voice breaking. Why did you do this to me? Emma was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried something that might have been regret. At first, it was just to prove Victoria right. She said you were a wealthy man playing at being poor, looking for a poor woman to play at loving you. She thought you were hypocritical and naive. I thought it would be easy to prove her point and collect my winnings. Winnings? Victoria bet me $50,000 that I couldn't make you fall in love with me while pretending to be everything you thought you wanted. Emma looked down at her hands. It seemed like easy money at the time. Marcus felt sick. $50,000. That's what this was worth to you? It was supposed to be, Emma said quietly. But somewhere along the way, things got complicated. You weren't what I expected, Marcus. Victoria described you as this shallow, rich boy looking for a trophy girlfriend from the wrong side of the tracks. But you're not shallow. You're genuine in your own way, even when you're lying about who you are. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. So we were both lying to each other. Yes, but there's a difference, Emma said, her voice growing harder again. You were lying to protect yourself. I was lying to hurt you. You wanted to find real love. I wanted to prove that real love doesn't exist. Marcus stood up abruptly, pacing around the small bookstore that had become the stage for their elaborate deception. Did any of it mean anything to you? Any of it at all? Emma watched him pace, her expression unreadable. That's the problem, Marcus. More of it meant something than I expected. I started to care about you despite myself. I started to feel guilty about what I was doing. There were nights when I would lie awake thinking about telling you the truth, about calling off the whole thing. But you didn't. No, I didn't. Because every time I started to feel guilty, I would remember that you were doing the same thing to me. You were lying about who you were, manipulating the situation to get what you wanted. We were both pretending to be people we weren't. Marcus stopped pacing and looked at her. It's not the same thing, Emma. I was trying to find someone who could love me authentically. You were trying to prove that authentic love is impossible. Are you sure about that? Emma challenged. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you were trying to control the situation as much as I was. You created a fake identity, a fake life, fake circumstances. You manipulated me into loving a version of you that doesn't really exist. How is that different from what I did? The question hit Marcus harder than he expected because there was truth in it. He had been manipulating the situation, creating artificial circumstances to get the outcome he wanted. The difference was in their intentions, but the methods had been surprisingly similar. I never wanted to hurt you, Marcus said. Neither did I. Not at first, Emma replied. But somewhere along the way, we both got so caught up in our deceptions that we forgot about the damage we might be doing to each other. They sat in silence for a while, two people who had found something real in the middle of their elaborate lies, only to watch it crumble under the weight of their deceptions. The bookstore around them felt like a museum of their relationship, filled with memories that now seemed false. What happens now? Marcus asked finally. Emma stood up, gathering her purse and coat. Now we both have to live with what we've done to each other. You got your answer, Marcus. You found someone who could love you for who you are, even if she was pretending to be someone else while she did it. And I got my answer, too. I proved that even the most authentic-seeming love can be built on lies. Emma, wait, Marcus called as she headed for the door. Despite everything, despite all the lies and manipulation, what we had felt real to me. Didn't it feel real to you, too? Emma paused at the door, her hand on the handle. When she turned back to look at him, Marcus saw something in her eyes that gave him a flicker of hope. That's the most heartbreaking part of all this, Marcus, she said softly. It felt more real than anything I've ever experienced. But how can you build a future? On a foundation made entirely of lies? With that, she walked out of the bookstore and out of his life, leaving Marcus alone with the wreckage of their elaborate deception and the devastating knowledge that they had found exactly what they were both looking for, only to destroy it, with their need to control and manipulate the very thing they claimed to want most. 6 months later, Marcus stood in his penthouse office again, but the view from his floor-to-ceiling windows looked different now. The city sprawled beneath him as it always had, but he no longer saw it as a symbol of his success. Instead, he saw millions of people living their lives, struggling with real problems, building genuine relationships without the elaborate deceptions he had thought necessary. He had returned to his old life after Emma left, slipping back into his expensive suits and luxury cars like putting on familiar but uncomfortable clothes. His employees welcomed him back with relief. His business partners resumed their strategic conversations, and his social calendar filled up with the same charity galas and networking events he had fled from 2 years earlier. On the surface, everything was exactly as he had left it. But Marcus was not the same man who had walked away from this life. The experience with Emma had changed him in ways he was still discovering. He found himself questioning everything about his world, the motivations of people around him, the meaning of his success, the very foundations of the life he had built. The hardest part was that he couldn't stop thinking about Emma. Despite everything she had done, despite the elaborate deception and the cruelty of her experiment, he couldn't forget the moments when their connection had felt genuine. He replayed their conversations, analyzing them for signs of authenticity, trying to separate the performance from the real woman underneath. His therapist, Dr. Sarah Kim, listened patiently as Marcus wrestled with the contradictions of his experience. "You're both victims and perpetrators in this situation," she told him during one of their sessions. "You both created false identities to manipulate the other person's feelings. The fact that real feelings develop despite the deception doesn't make what either of you did acceptable." Marcus had been seeing Dr. Kim for 3 months, trying to understand not just what had happened with Emma, but why he had felt the need to create such an elaborate deception in the first place. Through their conversations, he began to recognize patterns in his life, ways he had used his wealth as both a shield and a weapon, protecting himself from genuine vulnerability while also testing other people's motivations. "I wanted to find someone who could love me for who I really am," Marcus said during one session. "But I realize now that I wasn't being who I really am. I was being who I thought I should be to get the love I wanted." Dr. Kim nodded. "And what do you think Emma was doing?" "The same thing, I guess. She was being who she thought she needed to be to prove her point about me." Marcus paused, thinking. Maybe we deserved each other. The revelation that had haunted Marcus most was the realization that Emma's sister Victoria had been right about him, at least partially. He had been naive to think he could control the circumstances of love and still find something authentic. He had been selfish to put Emma through his experiment without her knowledge or consent, and he had been hypocritical to judge other women for being interested in his money while simultaneously hiding that money to manipulate Emma's feelings. But Emma had been wrong about something too. Love, real love, wasn't impossible. Marcus had felt it, even in the middle of their mutual deception. The problem wasn't that authentic love couldn't exist. The problem was that neither of them had been brave enough to be authentic. 3 months. Into therapy, Marcus made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He announced that he was stepping back from the day-to-day operations of his businesses and creating a foundation focused on financial literacy and support for working families. He wanted to use his wealth in a way that actually helped people, rather than just accumulating more wealth or buying him temporary relationships. "I spent 2 years pretending to understand what it's like to struggle financially," Marcus told his shocked board of directors. "Now I want to actually help people who are struggling for real." The foundation work gave Marcus a sense of purpose he had never found in pure business success. He worked with families facing medical debt, helped fund financial education programs, and supported small businesses in underserved communities. For the first time, his money was solving real problems for real people rather than just creating opportunities for him to question other people's motivations. But even as Marcus rebuilt his life around more meaningful work, he couldn't shake his thoughts about Emma. He had tried dating again, approaching relationships with what he hoped was more honesty and self-awareness. But every woman he met seemed to pale in comparison to the memory of Emma, even knowing that much of what he remembered had been a performance. The breakthrough came on a rainy Tuesday, almost exactly 1 year after their last conversation in the bookstore. Marcus was leaving a foundation event when he saw a familiar figure across the street. Emma was coming out of the hospital where she had claimed to work, still in scrubs, looking tired but real, in a way that made Marcus's heart skip. Without thinking, he crossed the street. "Emma!" She looked up, startled, and Marcus saw a flicker of the same complicated emotions he was feeling reflected in her eyes. "Hello, Marcus." They stood on the sidewalk in the light rain, two people who had shared the most intense relationship, of their lives built entirely on lies. "How are you?" Marcus asked, feeling the inadequacy of the question. "I'm okay," Emma said carefully. "I heard about your foundation. It's good work you're doing. You've been keeping track of me?" Emma smiled sadly. "It's hard not to. You're in the news a lot when you're not pretending to be a bookstore clerk." They talked for 20 minutes on that rain-soaked sidewalk, a conversation that was stilted and careful, but also strangely healing. Emma told him that she had donated the $50,000 from Victoria's bet to charity, that she had been unable to keep money earned from hurting someone she had come to care about. Marcus told her about therapy, about learning to be honest with himself about his motivations and fears. "I keep thinking about what you said," Emma told him as they prepared to part ways again. "About how we found something real despite all the lies. I think you were right about that, but not real enough to overcome what we did to each other," Marcus replied. "No," Emma agreed, "not real enough for that." As Emma walked away, Marcus realized that this was probably their real goodbye, the honest ending to their dishonest relationship. They had both learned painful lessons about love, trust, and the dangers of trying to control outcomes that were meant to unfold naturally. Marcus returned to his penthouse that night and looked out at the city with different eyes than he had started with. He had set out to find a woman who could love him for who he really was, and he had found her. But in the process, he had learned that he didn't really know who he was either. The experiment had failed and succeeded in ways he never could have imagined. The devastating truth he had uncovered wasn't about Emma's deception or even about the impossibility of authentic love. It was about himself. He had been so afraid of being loved for the wrong reasons that he had made it impossible to be loved for the right ones. He had wanted to be chosen for his authentic self while being fundamentally dishonest about who that self was. But perhaps that was the lesson he needed to learn. Real love required real vulnerability, real honesty, real risk. It couldn't be controlled or manufactured or tested. It could only be offered freely and hoped for in return. Marcus had hidden his fortune to find genuine love, and in the end, he had found it. The tragedy was that he had hidden so much of himself in the process that the love, while real, had nowhere true to land. Emma had been right about one thing. How could you build a future on a foundation made entirely of lies? The answer, Marcus now understood, was that you couldn't. But you could learn from the wreckage and try to build something better next time, something based on truth rather than manipulation, on courage rather than control. Love, he had discovered, was not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived, and the only way to live it was with an open heart and an honest soul.